when I think of, where the police officer and a pastor, where those kind of things might crisscross, is that I think both of the people that go into either one of those go in with the intention of helping people. But yet, while they still do a lot of that, they also see the dark side of society and people. And I think, like you were saying, with the addictive problems within the pastorate, that a lot of times it's escapism, that,
Oh, heavens, yeah.
they're seeing a lot of this dark side and they're looking for something to, take their mind off it, because it's just not all, candy and roses when you're
No, it's not.
either a
And there's a
pastor
real
or a police
misconception
officer.
too, Richard. There's a real misconception in the public. The public believes one thing about the police, but it's not the truth. And let me explain that real quick. I don't want to talk a lot. I want to hear from my wife more, but the public thinks the police, we've had about 60 police officers commit suicide this year across the country.
Yeah, it's an epidemic.
60 police officers, active and retired, about 60 have already taken their lives this year. Most people would say, yeah, it's a tough time to be a cop. That's why that's happening. That's not why it's happening. The stress in the life of a cop is about 15% from the street. A California 40-year veteran told me the other day, he said, Jimmy, I never lost one night's sleep over anything I saw on the street.
Mm.
I can tell you in my 35 years, I might have lost one night of sleep over what I saw on the street, seeing the constant bad, seeing the blood and the guts. That's not what stressed me out. And the public thinks that's why the police are so stressed. That's not true. The stress is coming from the administration, police chiefs, mayors, city council, like we've seen in Seattle and Portland, Chicago.
Right.
The stress is internal. Over 80% of the stress in the life of a cop is politics.
Wow.
And then there is a huge amount of stress coming from their marriage. Over half of cops end up in divorce. An expert on this told a friend of mine, he's been studying police suicides for 20 years. He said, you'll very rarely find a cop who is not married who kills himself. It's the stress of marriage. We had it happen here the other day, or 3 hours down the road, a police officer, great cop. He lived and died by the job, they told me. But he was separated from his wife. They were fighting. They were trying to reconcile. He got upset, went back to his apartment, took out a gun and killed himself. So it's the stress that cops are experiencing in marriage that's really getting them. So the streets are stress reliever. They're not doing to the police what the public. I was talking to a Portland cop when I was up there, and I said, he's been there 30 years. I said, doesn't all this bother you? He said, nah. He said, it just hits the body. I don't let it inside. Because I noticed when I was in Portland, they all jovial and laughing and carrying on. I'm like, wow, there's protesters outside. Oh, yeah, no biggie. But when you start talking about how the government, local government has let them down and stuff, I mean, that's what's hurting cops.
Well, that leads me to a question for Julie. You had mentioned, the wives and or it could be husbands, the spouses of police officers. As a chaplain, do your responsibilities extend to them? Because I would think that a lot of the stress that comes with, from the police officer, affects the marriage and affects, how the spouse is able to deal with the ancillary stress.
Right.
Is that something that a chaplain is asked to get involved with, or is that separate?
No. That's part of what we help with. That's part of our duties. So, let me just put some with what Jimmy just said. A police officer starts out typically very idyllic, right? I'm going to go, I'm going to, I'm going to really, I want to serve, or, it's just an exciting career, right? So you start out, and typically police officers, they're real justice minded. They want to serve and, in that way. Well, over time, there are so many aspects of the job that chips away at who they are and fundamentally. And unless a police officer begins his career fully grounded such as spiritually, and even then. So we know, one of the things we know just through research is that whatever kind of trauma a police officer begins his career with, that he's had in the past, such as childhood trauma or any other trauma, can either do two things. It can either give him resilience, where he's learned to overcome stuff, or it can be another, it can, lead up to PTSD and other things moving forward. So, and then you have the very command staff, like Jimmy said, command, who is supposed to be there backing them up, right? And they don't. And so you have that. And then also,
so they feel like they're kind of on their own to deal with all this without the support.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
They don't have the support. And then, it's just like any profession, when you see something day after day. So police officers deal with only about a fraction of the population, the community that they deal with in the city. A lot of times it's the same people over and over, right? So your perspective becomes skewed, right? That this is how people are. And over time, and the problem is most police officers don't realize that's what's happening to them, right? Because it just happens over time, right? Yeah. So you have a jaded perspective. You have the command staff not giving support, and then mental health in general. I mean, the pendulum is beginning to change, where people, police officers are starting to want to seek help for mental health, but it's still not there yet. I mean,
yeah, I think we'll have at least from the male perspective, I think, the police officer is, and we see the same thing in soldiers, that there's that machismo thing about, that going for counseling, they feel, there's a perception that, they can handle it on their own. They don't need, some counselor telling them what to feel and how to feel it.
Well, they're saying the same thing that, I went to 1,000 domestic disturbances in my career, Richard, and, you tell this couple they've been fighting, the marriage needs help. But I can count on one hand, when I look back at 35 years, I don't even need a full hand to count the number of times that anybody in a domestic disturbance was willing to admit they were wrong.
Right.
And the police, they go to all these things. Many of them have the same problem at home. And the problem that exists with the police is the same thing in the public and in the church. Very few people are going to do anything about their situation. They will agree with you, yeah, I ought to get some help. Or maybe I can do that, or I can't afford it, even though I own a $20,000 motorcycle and a $15,000 speedboat. Right. Very few people. I was reading some research the other day by USA Today, and they had interviewed hundreds, over 400 police officers at a big old department in Texas, and only a fraction of them were seeking any help. And there's never been more resources available to the police to help them than today, or veterans.
Right.
We have thousands of organizations committed to helping cops and veterans and first responders, right, but they're just not, on the whole, a majority of them are simply not going to do anything about it. It's kind of like when Jesus came across that lame man in John chapter 5, and he'd been lame for 38 years, right, waiting every day for an angel to come down and stir the water. First one in got healed. Yeah. Jesus walks up and says to him, "Do you want to get well?"
Right.
Because maybe you like sitting here waiting for an angel.
Right.
Do you want to be? And that's what we put before police officers. But I hate to admit this, but in my career, I can't think of 5 police officers that went to get help. Now, I know that's changing. I know in one big city in Texas, I won't mention which one, but they got a couple of thousand officers, and every day somebody comes to work asking for help. That's a good sign.
Well, I think it's
very few seek.
Like you referred to Bethesda. The question that Jesus asked was, "Do you want to walk? Do you want to be healed?" And I think there's the same thing. And Julie, maybe you can lend something to this, that if a police officer is obligated to get counseling, say after a traumatic event, a shooting or what have you, you know, they think of it as obligatory, something to get through. And the question remains, you know, do you want help? And if they don't, there's going to be resistance to, you know, opening up to it, and instead of just getting through it.
I think it's deeper than that. I think you have to realize that you need help before you get help, right?
Right.
And that's the problem, is that we created, you know, within the police community, you know, this that I don't need help. Oh, it's nothing. You know, I don't need help.
Yes.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Right.
And they don't realize that they've fundamentally changed, right? The ones that notice it is their families. And that's why there's so many issues within the police family community, because their wives and the children know they've changed. They know that they're not the same person that they started, you know, when they started the career. There's a thing that we know, hypervigilance is, I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's something that police officers have, and they have to have it in their everyday job just to stay alive, right? And the police officers that aren't hypervigilant in their job can end up in a bad way, right? So, but this, we know that this continued every day in and day out hypervigilance eats away at, because it's hormones that are actually fundamentally changing the brain. And so they start to begin to act in different ways. They get home, they can't let their guard down. It starts to even control, like I said before, their perspective. Oh, and then it starts all people, but they don't realize that they've been changing because it's been a gradual change. And so, but their families do. I used to, a long time ago, teach with another police officer in the academy. And one of the things I would always tell the officers, look, you may not know you're changing, but your family does. And if your family is saying, hey, you have an issue, you have a problem, you know, maybe you need to go get some help, or
You have to listen.
or, you know, you listen to them. But that's the problem. You know, I don't have an issue. I'm fine. I can handle this, you know. And so what we see is you know, because I said I'm part of the peer support team too, you know, we'll have an incident, and you'll go and, you know, y'all talk about it. And most of the time, oh, I'm fine. But you can tell, because I've gotten to know these guys. I know they're not fine, right? They're struggling just like the rest of us are struggling at a difficult call. And but there's you know, we can't admit it. We can't admit. And so what you do is you stuff and you tell yourself, I can handle it. And so, you know, that's a lot of what is going on. And before long, you know, you become someone that really you don't even recognize yourself. And so it's just an issue. And then you start doing risky behavior on duty, risky behavior off duty.